All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Coffee with Tony 2026, as the mug says. And today we're going to talk a little bit about politics. I want to preface this because this is specifically about the Democratic Party and how they do business and why I feel it's very dangerous. I want to say it from the beginning because I don't want anybody feeling like I'm attacking them, because my emphasis is on how the party does business, and therefore the politicians, the judges, and people that get elected, and the people that are involved at the higher levels. So I'm not talking about you, the voter. So please don't take it that way. And I also like to point out that this is May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So even though I didn't plan it this way, I would love to be able to say I planned it this way. I think it's neat that it works out this way, because the end part, the part that's dangerous, when I start talking about that, I start showing some statistics about mental health. And, you guys can make your own opinion, but I'll let you know what they are and how it looks. So I thought that was it was perfect timing. Plus it came on the heels of my other 2 videos, which is all about emotional intelligence. It just kind of worked out that way. It's kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about influence. Before one more thing before I begin is I am going to record this because it is going to be long. I'm going to record it in 3 sections. I'm going to make the one video, so if you want to watch it all in one video, that'll be available to you. However, if you want to watch it one part at a time, that'll be an available option for you as well. And the reason I'm doing that is because I talked to some friends and asked them, because I knew it's going to be about an hour and a half. And so they're like, you might want to divide that up. My opinion was, I like it all together because of how it fits together, and I think it's more clearly understood. And so anyway, I'm going to do it both ways. So if you see when I go into one section, when I transition and it looks like the camera cut, that's because the camera did cut. So I'm giving you a fair warning now. I'm doing it that way. All right, so in this video I'm going to talk about the Democratic Party, how they're doing business, and why it's dangerous. And the how they're doing business part is going to be divided into two sections. One is going to be the influence they have and how they acquired that influence. And the second part is going to be what they're doing with that influence. And then, so that'll be the how they're doing business. And then, like I said, I'll do the third part, which is why it's so dangerous. All right, so influence. So, you hear everybody say it all the time. They're teaching a democratic agenda in our schools, and I believed it, but I wanted to have a reference. So I went out and I bought this book. It's National Curriculum Standards for Social Studies, and it's written by the National Council for Social Studies. And this book is divided up into themes, and then those themes, like this one here, says people, places, and environments. So that's the main theme. And then you see all these little, like here is questions for exploration, knowledge, That's going to be, like, those are the areas within that theme. So when I say under the people, places, environments theme, middle school graders are, they discuss how do changes in the use and distribution of resources affect people's lives. Then you'll know what I'm talking about. So I'm sorry that I feel like I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but I want you to understand these different things. I don't want it to be too confusing as I'm just whipping through this. All right. So the influence in high school, in schools, we see the national standards. And in this book, Some of the themes that I said were going to be in here is culture, time, continuity, and change, individuals, groups, and environments, individual development and identity, power, authority, and governance, production, distribution, and consumptions, science, technology, and society, global connections, and finally civic ideals and practices. The book is broken down into these themes, and then there's different areas, as I said. So anyway, on page 34, I'm going to start talking about some of the content here, and you can see where they're possibly talking about, where there's room for them to discuss these things that fall into the Democratic Party agendas, things like critical race theory and globalization and social justice and whatever. So anyway, on page 34 in the People, Places, and Environments theme, under the questions for exploration portion, there are possible areas to explore socialism. In middle school portion, one of those questions was, how do changes of use and distribution of resources affect people's lives? My guess is they discuss redistribution of wealth, and that's socialism. So it's possible, anyway. I don't really know because I was hoping that this would be laid out more, like for how to teach it, but I didn't see all that stuff in. It's just kind of generally outlined. Anyway, in the power, authority, and governance questions for exploration portion on page 46, one of the questions they pose is, what conflict among fundamental principles and values of constitutional democracy are evident in social issues? My guess is there's probably some discussion on social justice, protesting, and things like that occur during those discussions. That was a question for middle school. And the question for high schoolers in that same section is, how are individual rights protected and social justice promoted within the context of majority rule? Another question is, under what circumstances is the exercise of political power and authority legitimate? So for me, when I read this, it appears that there's probably some discussions on what politicians and what kind of policies they should and shouldn't implement, and how social justice might be related to that, or how social justice could affect that. Also, in the People, Places, and Environments section, in the knowledge portion on page 35, one of the middle school grade expectations for knowledge to be gained is knowledge of the patterns of demographic and political change and cultural diffusion in the past and present. E.g., which is the example they're giving here, changing national boundaries, migration, and settlement, and the diffusion of and changes of customs and ideas. So, I mean, it's right in the title, right? We're teaching open borders, let's bring them in, and then we're expected to change our customs and ideas and, diffusion of our beliefs. That's what it appears just based on that wording. I don't know how teachers are teaching it. I imagine it's different. I imagine there's teachers that have an axe to grind and they're teaching the democratic socialist agenda, the democratic agenda in general. And then there's others that aren't. And I had some conversations with my son because I was wondering where, if these conversations did come up. And he's getting ready to graduate now, so... But he did say things like that are related to the Democratic Party, their agenda. They do come up, and like LGBTQT, that comes up a lot. And he said it happens organically, but as I go through this, you'll see there's some places where you get the feel that you could easily or swing those discussions one way or another, whether you steer away from it or you steer towards it. And so, anyway, I'm babbling a little bit there. Let me move on. So, all right, so there's that. And then in that same section under the products portion on page 37, one of the products which I believe is an assignment to create is to create a map. Products, I believe that products in here, those are expected assignments. That's what I was trying to say there. Sorry, I'm kind of rushing through this because I feel like this is the boring part. But I want people to know about it, you know, what I found. So anyway, on page 37, under the products portion of that same section, I believe is an assignment there is an assignment to create a map to represent changes over time to borders and balance of power in a region. Now, obviously, that's an assignment to promote open borders, my guess. Certainly is an opportunity. And that's the thing, like I said, all the teachers are different. I have a good friend of mine that I know going back to, I think we weren't even in elementary school yet. So we're talking 4, maybe 5. I was 5, I think, but he was a little bit younger than me. And he's a social studies teacher, and he's a good guy. I think he's one of the good ones. I don't think he would be pushing his beliefs. You know, he is well, I think he's a Democrat. I don't think I even ever asked him. But whether he is or not, I don't think he would push his agenda or his beliefs either way. I have a lot of respect for that guy. And those teachers that are out there that are doing that, I have a ton of respect for them because I imagine there's a lot of pressure when you hear about the things that are going on in school districts, you know. And I don't have time to get into that because I didn't plan that. But anyway. And then there's others like main themes that I don't really have to get into and say under this section. You know, it's right there in the title, right? So, in my opinion, I'm pretty sure there's discussion of racial identity development, sexual identity development, and in the individual development identity section or theme. And so there's obviously room there for things like racial identity development and sexual identity development. I can only imagine that in the racial calm down, Tony. You'll get through it. Sorry. In that racial identity development discussions, if they're having them, I imagine they are. I imagine there's a lot of your critical race theory taught in those things, in those areas. Same way with, sexual identity development. I don't know how much they talk about that, but you can assume they probably do. There's some discussions. It is part of identity development. And those are probably where you see things like LGBTQ identity start to be promoted in conversations. And similar to, that's what my son was saying, they come up, about people's identities and stuff like that. The LGBTQ comes up apparently a lot too. And then there's the global connections, right? We don't really need to talk about that. We know it's clearly globalism, All right, I'm sorry, I feel like that was the boring part. This part here I think is a little bit more interesting because I start talking about how different things connect to the Democratic Party and how the money is the tie that binds, if you will. And so the National Education Association, which is the largest U.S. labor union representing more than 3 million educators. So according to filings obtained by Fox News Digital, the NEA's last fiscal year report showed it sent tens of thousands of dollars to the George Soros' Tides Foundation Network. The Tides Foundation Network is a left-wing nonprofit organization that donates to liberal social justice causes. The problem is that it was done with taxpayer money that was supposed to, and not private donations. And so with the tax dollar, you're not expected to promote and uphold social justice, activist organizations. But that's what they did here. And so it shows a clear connection between the Democratic Party and the teachers' unions. And the reason I say that is if they're getting money from our government, our budget, we're budgeting money and sending it to this union, I just imagine that most of the people that were in favor of that and pushed for that were probably your Democratic folks. That's just my guess. Not to say that there might not be some Republicans involved with that, but I'm just going to go out on a limb there and guess. And so anyway, then you have them receiving money from our government, our tax dollars, and then turning around and giving money to, this was a George Soros cause. And normally it's the other way, which you'll see here in a little bit, where he's giving money to all these different organizations. But in this case, they were taking tax dollars and giving it to George Soros' Tides Foundation. So, I don't want to go on too much there. I think you get the idea. There is clearly a connection, All right. So now what about colleges? Surely they're not doing this, are they? Right? Well, and every curriculum is different. I can't pull out a curriculum for each program, each class within each program and say this is what they're teaching. I just do not have the resources or the time or even the desire to go through that much material. But we can look at how money is exchanged, right? So according to the Inside Higher Education article titled Open Society University Network, launched with $1 billion gift from George Soros. And according to that article, they spent $1 billion to start. They spent $1 billion to start the George Soros, $1 billion that George Soros gave them to start this Open Society University Network. So Open Society, we know George Soros, right? That's his thing. That's his network, or that's his organization, philanthropy organization. And so here he starts this with $1 billion. He starts this, and apparently it's going to be the Bard College and Central European University will lead up the efforts to focus on a range of education, social, civic, human rights, and environmental issues. Okay? So just to tell you a little bit about those websites, what they are. Inside Higher Education, according to their About Us on their website, they provide the latest news analysis solutions for the entire higher education community. They are also owned by Times Higher Education. And according to their website, Times Higher Education is the world's most authoritative source of data analysis and information on higher education, with 5 decades of experience dedicated to reporting on stuff like that. So, all right, so now we talked about schools, we talked about colleges, media. I'm sure my folks are laughing now. I'm sure, like, the people I know that may have turned in this, you're laughing. Like you don't even, just skip it, Tony. Just skip it. But I'm going to make it fast anyway, because there's so much more to talk about. There's an article by the Research Center. Actually, Fox News also covered it. And I think in my links, I will provide links to all these sources, so you can look at them. There's a ton of them. I want this to be very well supported. But anyway, I think in the links I provide links to both of them. But anyway, they're reporting that Soros donated over $48 million to more than 30 different news organizations between 2011 and 2014. And that's also the title of the article. So I want you to remember the dates. So I don't know if this money going to the media started before that. I'm sure you can make the argument, but based on what I found, this is one of the articles that's dated on this, and dated as far back as 2011, and that's the furthest back that I found information. So I want you to pay attention to that, because I thought it was, when I get to the other part, 2011 seems to be a connecting date on some things. That's also the date that this book was published, and when the new national standards were published. So you can make the argument, based on the information we do have in this article, that could be about when that started as well. And so remember 2011, because it's going to come up in the third part of why this is so dangerous. All right, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. All right, so we got schools, we got college, we got the media's covered. What other influence could he possibly have, right? What, like that's it, like that's got to be it, right? No dice, folks. So prosecutors. So I'm going to talk now about how he spends a lot of money on campaigns, and some of them are prosecutors, some of them are politicians. So according to the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, which is a 501 nonprofit dedicated to supporting and defending law enforcement professionals. So in case you're not aren't paying attention, you know, when things happen, people get shot because they get in front of a law enforcement agent, or they do something, they don't stop when they're told to, or whatever it is. You know what happens. You're guilty until proven innocent if you're a cop. And shout out to the cops. You guys do not get enough money for what you do. God bless you, and thank you for what you do. Anyway, got sidetracked again. But anyway, that's what they defend stuff like this, and they also write articles, and they have other stuff too. But they wrote in this article, they wrote an article expressing their concern about how Soarces' money is changing how crimes are being prosecuted. And in their article, they reported that from 2018 to 2021, Soros spent $13 million on only 10 prosecutor races. So 13, that's like 1.34 or something like that million for each of those races. Why is it that important to you? That's what I want to know. But then, if you follow along with the news, you hear the reports. They don't prosecute certain crimes. They make the policy. So we can't get enough votes to change the laws. So then we have people that are in office that decide what goes to court. And they make up policies like, well, we're not going to prosecute anybody unless there's personal damage or theft of more than $900 or whatever it is. And that's going on out in California. And there's plenty others. Trying to move along here because I know that altogether this is going to be very long. So, but anyway, 10 prosecutor races, $13 million. They also reported that to date, Soros has spent more than $40 million on direct campaign spending over the past decade to elect prosecutors. So, and this was written, I believe, since the dates were covered 2021, I imagine it was published in 2021. So, the last decade, and I'm just noticing this now, when do you think that started? I don't know. I don't really know, because I don't have those facts in front of me. But I can assume, based on the dates they include in that article, probably started around 2011. All right, so it's looking worse and worse. But what about politicians? Surely our Democratic Party, they're innocent, right? They're the good guys. Just ask, they will tell you. Surely they're not taking any kind of money, or they're not influenced in any way, are they? No, I don't know. But according to an article written by Brian Schwartz from CNBC back in January 2023, titled "Nonprofit Financed by Billionaire George Soros Quietly Donated $140 million to Political Causes in just 2021." $140 million in just 2021. In that article, he discusses how George Soros-backed nonprofit organizations invested at least $140 million into politically charged nonprofits just 1 year before the midterm elections. In addition to those donations, he also donated more than $170 million during the 2022 midterm election cycles to help Democratic campaigns and political action committees. The donations bring Soros' contribution to political campaigns and causes to roughly $500 million since January 2020. Something to keep in mind. This article was published in January 2023. So within 3 years, $500 million. Why do you need that much influence? Why do you need that much power? All right. So that's the influence they have. And I'm going to shut this off now and take a little break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about what are they doing with this influence. Because let's face it, there's a lot of money being circulated, and there's a lot of people influenced by that money. And the data, the information, these reports, these articles, they clearly show that. So when I come back, I'm going to talk about what are they using this influence for. Okay? All right, I'll be back in a minute.